Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host TJ Mabarty. We are coming to you live on Thursday afternoon. Today is August 15th and we are going to be covering some of the biggest headlines from NFL training camps that have taken place over the course of the past 24 hours or so. We are going to be starting off by talking about the trade that went down yesterday, the New England Patriots sending pass rusher, edge rusher Matt Judon to the Atlanta Falcons in exchange for a third-round pick. So we'll be breaking down what this means for the state of both teams as the Falcons continue to buy into their current nucleus and trying to make themselves a contender after missing the playoffs last year. Meanwhile, the Patriots at a little bit of the bottom of the barrel, and talk about what it means and what the current state of their roster is. We're then going to be bouncing around with a couple of the different updates and news articles from NFL training camps. We will be discussing Bills linebacker Matt Milano tearing his bicep, and he is going to be out indefinitely. A brutal loss for a Bills roster that has already seen so much turnover over the past year or so. So we'll break down that and the implications there. Additionally, in Washington, we are hearing reports from Dan Quinn that the team is searching for a more reliable wide receiver too, which definitely surprised me a little bit. Jahan Dotson is a very promising young player, but reportedly he has been really struggling with drops, and the Commanders, who have obviously been in talks for Brandon Ayuk, or at least in rumors with Brandon Ayuk for a few months now, they seem to be looking for a wide receiver, so we'll dive into that. We will be previewing the upcoming season for the Green Bay Packers after a surprisingly great season for them. And then finally, we will be finishing off the show with a little bit of MLB talk, breaking down the series between the Boston Red Sox and the Texas Rangers. So a whole lot to dive into today. But before we do so, just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. To any of our viewers, be sure to use that comment section to get in your thoughts, your questions, your takes on all of the latest happenings in sports. And if you would consider leaving a tip or donation, you can use the new super chat button that is at the bottom, the $sign on your YouTube channel. Anything would be greatly appreciated there. It helps also prioritize your comments. So we here at GSMC thrive off of making these shows as interactive as possible. So if you would consider doing so, again, would be greatly appreciated. Yesterday, the news broke that the New England Patriots have finally decided to make a move on this Matthew Judon front. It has been a few months now, it feels like, of contract negotiations between the Patriots and the star edge rusher, and they have not been making a whole lot of progress for a while now. Judon been holding out of practices, and now he is officially on his way out of New England and on his way to Atlanta, where the Falcons traded for him to try and help bolster their roster that they feel like may be ready to compete in the NFC, which is pretty wide open. The exchange was just a third-round pick from Atlanta to New England, so a pretty small price to pay for the Falcons. Now, obviously, the price tag is the big conversation with Judon, because even, some people have concerns with Judon coming off of a torn bicep injury that forced him to miss almost the entire 2023 season. I happen to think that that was a little bit of a freak injury, and that it shouldn't be something that really bogs down his play in 2024, but it's definitely something to consider. He just turned 32 years old, and once you start getting into that age range, injuries your body just starts to fail you to some degree, so a little bit of a concern there. But doesn't sound like the Falcons necessarily have any plans to immediately pay him. A little bit surprising, especially what's going on right now with the Bryce Huff situation with the New York Jets. For context, the Jets traded for, or Hassan Reddick, where the Jets traded for Reddick in March. Didn't work out a contract extension, and Reddick has been holding out since then and has since requested a trade. So to see a team make a similar move with no real intentions to extend him just yet while all of that is going on is pretty interesting. But I would have to imagine that there has to be some sort of mutual understanding between Judon and Atlanta for him to sign off, and not just a change of scenery for him to continue to do the same thing holding out, but that he will play for Atlanta. And I think that he's still a positive impact player, especially when you look at the Falcons. They were sort of, when you look back to the NFL draft, they were just heavily mocked to have their pick of whoever they wanted for the first edge rusher. There was a pretty clear need that they needed to ramp up the pressure that they could apply to opposing quarterbacks. They obviously instead go with Michael Penix Jr. and what was a surprise pick with that 8th overall selection. So, definitely a polarizing move there. I'm not as high on it as I think that other people have sort of talked themselves into, but it left them without an edge rusher that now they're able to pick up with a 3rd round pick. Matthew Judon is way better than whatever edge rusher you could have gotten, at least in terms of immediate impact in comparison to whoever they would have picked in the 1st round this year. So again, long-term solution, not there. We'll see what happens. Atlanta is already a pretty expensive roster. They actually had to restructure a contract with their Pro Bowl guard Chris Lindstrom to even be able to make this deal happen and stay under the salary cap. So, the Falcons are going to be an expensive team moving forward. I kind of doubt that they are going to work out some sort of contract extension, Atlanta and Matt Judon, but we'll see. Definitely can be open-minded here. I do think that their defense definitely got better with Judon, and for whatever it's worth as well, I do like their 2nd round pick from this year's draft, Rook Orororo of Clemson. I think that he can be a really nice, run stopper / can get you a little bit of production in the pass rush from a nose tackle position. So that, I think that the Falcons, they're in a wide open division and overall a pretty wide open conference. Now, I am definitely not putting them in Super Bowl contention conversations at this point. I think that people might be getting a little bit ahead of themselves in terms of that, but if Kirk Cousins can produce at a high level, there's a lot of talent on that offensive side of the ball. Raheem Morris, their new head coach, I think that he has a very bright future as a coach in the NFL. We saw what he's been able to do on that defensive side of the ball. And, they have a decent number of playmakers now. You look in their secondary. Jesse Bates is one of the best safeties in football. A.J. Terrell, a pretty solid cornerback 1. Outside of that, secondary isn't exactly their strongest point of attack, but they got some guys in that front 7 as well that can be difference makers. So the Falcons should be very much in contention, should be the favorite in their division, in my opinion. And then, who knows what happens once we get to the playoffs. Again, the NFC is very open. So I think that they have pretty solid chances, and, I don't think that this is necessarily a needle mover in terms of this deal acquiring Judon, but it definitely helps a lot, and it does fill a hole that the Falcons had headed into this season as it is, and all it cost them was a 3rd round pick. So overall, a pretty good deal for the Falcons. On the Patriots side of this, it's a little more complicated, I feel like, because the objective fact is that the Patriots are not close to being a Super Bowl, even a playoff contending team. The offense is still such a mess. And at this point, they have a number of talented defenders on their defense. So I think that, if you are trying to argue that the Patriots, they can be, if their offense is even slightly below average, they could work themselves into more wins than expected, because I do feel like their defense has the potential to be a top 10 unit in the league this upcoming year. Now, losing Judon definitely hurts that sentiment, and that is sort of where things get complicated, because again, you look at the overall timeline that the Patriots are currently on, and they're not winning anything anytime soon. And we've seen them in the past. I know that during the prime Bill Belichick years, it was always selling guys off early for extra compensation. Feels like a little bit in recent years, the Pats have sort of been on the other side of that, where they've allowed some of these players that they knew they weren't going to re-sign. I think specifically the past few seasons, Stephon Gilmore and J.C. Jackson. And J.C. Jackson obviously flamed out in L.A., but there's a reason he got the contract that he did when he signed with the Chargers that offseason, is because he was a real asset at that point. And the Patriots recently have been too conservative on just having them stick around for some middling seasons and then them walking in free agency for nothing. So I can understand the Patriots actually cashing out this time. You only got a third-round pick for it, though. And at least where I'm at with Judon, I think Judon can still be a plus player. The fact that he does have the 1 year left on his contract means that his value isn't sky high, but I feel like if Judon gives you good production in the beginning of the year, you could have at least gotten this third-round pick, and your team would have been better for it, at least with the time that he's on the roster. So I have, especially as a Patriots fan, a little bit of conflicting feelings here, because yes, I understand that, again, you want to take advantage, you don't want your asset to leave for nothing, but it's so frustrating because they don't pay anybody. And in New England, we've been talking about cap space for years now, and the Patriots are yet to really act on it, other than an active 2021, which I believe is the year that they brought in Judon, and he ended up being a great signing for them. Ultimately was a bargain of a deal, 4 years, $54 million at the time, so he was definitely underpaid coming into these last couple years of his contract, turning into an all-pro type player. And now it's just, you see the best player for the Patriots over these past few years, he ends up getting traded for a third-round pick. And it just feels like sort of a slap in the face that, yeah, that's all they got. But at the same time, mentioned all of the red flags with Judon and why his market wouldn't have ever been a first-round pick, probably not a second-round pick. And you're trading your best player on the roster for not all that significant compensation. So it's like, yeah, you got something, but there's a good chance that it turns into nothing. And that's just how bad the Patriots roster is currently, that their best player, all it's going to get you is a third-round pick. So Patriots are clearly a long ways away from where they need to be in terms of winning games. So they're just putting that to rest. It's been very noisy with Judon, especially since training camp started. But he seemed like he wanted to stick around as well, and the Patriots not going out and spending that money on a new contract definitely does just feel like it's kind of the state of where the Patriots are at, where, there isn't really a clear timeline in front of Patriots fans. It's that Drake May hopefully will be the franchise, but who's even going to be on the team by the time that Drake May is firing and the Patriots are good once again? Because there are just so many holes that they need to fill. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section. Definitely, again, nice move for the Falcons to be able and go to get their edge rusher. Patriots, they're in the rebuild. So Let me know what your thoughts are. We are now going to be sticking in the AFC East with the Patriots division rival in the Buffalo Bills, because just this morning we got news that their number one linebacker, maybe number one defensive player on the roster as a whole, Matt Milano, just tore his bicep, as we talk about Judon as well. Milano has torn his bicep, and he is expected to be out. He is being listed as being ruled out indefinitely. So we'll talk about what that means for the Bills and just sort of the culmination of different losses to this Bills team that can be a little bit of a red flag. So we're going to be diving into that. But first, a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, no, this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we are now going to be moving on to the news that the Buffalo Bills are suffering a key loss, as linebacker Matt Milano has torn his bicep from a practice on Wednesday afternoon, and he is now listed as out indefinitely. This is a brutal loss for the Bills to head into the regular season next year with a very different roster. Went through a number of different changes during the offseason, lost some key players on both sides of the ball, but especially so on defense, where because of some financial issues, they had to part ways with some leaders on that defense. Jordan Poyer, Micah Hyde, Tre'Davious White, Leonard Floyd. You can, throw into an impactful defensive player as well that they lost this offseason. And it is just brutal news to hear this take place. Matt Milano is maybe the best player on the Buffalo Bills defense. He was All-Pro first team in 2022. Seemed like he was going to be taking on an even bigger role that next season, with Tremaine Edmonds, leaving in free agency as well that year. And now the Bills are at a point where it's a little bit, again, of a rebuilding defense in some ways. And losing Matt Milano in the middle is just a brutal loss. Again, he's probably their best defender when fully healthy. Love Ed Oliver as well, but really Milano is both the leader with his skill, and it feels like, at least from afar, in the locker room. And as things currently stand, it's looking like December is sort of the goal for being able to bring him back at that point. When we are looking at December, we're looking around like week 13 to week 17. The playoffs start early in January, so the hope would be that you can get a few games under his belt leading up into the playoffs. But again, a lot of unknown right now with this development. And it stinks so much for Milano, who last year, like I mentioned, was expected to take on a bigger role in 2023 and ended up breaking his leg in October to miss the majority of the season there. So super unfortunate seeing things break out this way. ultimately, the Bills, I think a lot of people, I've probably been higher on the Bills than a lot of people, considering, yes, I do understand that they lost a lot last offseason, but if you have Josh Allen and your offense is, still good enough and you have an identity on defense, Josh Allen might just be enough to carry you to 10 wins a year, which is definitely still in the cards. But last year, while Milano was out, the Bills did sort of have to scratch and claw their way to get back into postseason contention, which they did, and ultimately they ended up the year by having a great chance. But something that definitely would have helped them in that playoff game against the Chiefs was having Matt Milano available to them. And I guess we're just sort of up in the air about what it's going to look like for him moving forward this season, which means you're going to need more production out of the current linebacking core. Thought that Terrell Bernard had an overall pretty good season last year. It's going to be a lot on Dorian Williams, who is a bit of an unknown overall with how things are going to work out here with the Bills. Just played his rookie season last year and wasn't asked to, appeared in every game for them, but really wasn't asked to do all that much. Only 40 total tackles on the season, so he's going to be thrown into a role that I'm sure they were not anticipating. So I think that this defense could definitely be in sort of rough shape for at least the regular season until Matt Milano gets there. I think that this is just about as impactful of a loss that the Bills could have suffered outside of Josh Allen. And I don't think that that's hyperbole, really. Matt Milano's a baller when he's on the field, which is why, again, Josh Allen just being there might be enough to get you to 9-10 wins. And if that's the case and they're able to get Matt Milano and he is feeling healthy for the playoffs, I'm sort of back on the Bills to some degree as well, but this is definitely a real blow to them. And again, I had sort of talked myself back into them, that especially in that secondary, I feel like by the end of it, we were seeing a secondary that had leaders 100% in Poyer and Micah Hyde and Tre'Davious White, but a lot of health issues there, specifically looking at White. Poyer and Hyde were a little bit on the older end themselves anyways, so pressing the reset button in the secondary a little bit wasn't the worst thing to me. They went and they got Rasul Douglas in the trade deadline last year from the Packers. Taron Johnson, I think, is a solid cornerback option as well. So it's not like their secondary is going to be Swiss cheese, but it's definitely, not a stronger group. And now your front seven as well takes as impactful as a hit as you possibly could have had there. I definitely am liking their defense a lot less. Now, again, just to reiterate one more time, as long as if he can be back for the playoffs and fully healthy, Josh Allen's good enough to get the Bills in the realm of contention. But I also do think that in this AFC, the margin of error is probably so slim because you're obviously trying to dethrone the Chiefs, who should honestly be better this upcoming season if they can get some more consistency from especially the pass catchers. Defensively, yes, losing L'Jarius Sneed definitely isn't ideal for them, but I think that, sure, if they have to lean on their offense and lean on Patrick Mahomes a little bit more, who now has some, actual weapon, like more legitimate weapons, I would say, with Rashee Rice in his second season where, yeah, he's had his off-the-field stuff this offseason, but it sounds like he is expected to not have a suspension handed out for the beginning of this season, so he'll be available for them. They bring in Hollywood Brown in free agency, plus the draft selection of Xavier Worthy. It's not going to be an elite receiving core, but I think it should be more than enough for Patrick Mahomes. So that's obviously the top competitor. They got faster on defense. Meanwhile, the Bills are dealing with a lot more sort of fill-in guys on that defensive end, especially with Milano out. So that's a tough break. Kind of a positive break for the Bills last year was the fact that the Bengals weren't really in contention necessarily. And, the bigger break probably being that Aaron Rodgers got hurt early on in the year just for the sake of the division being wide open. But a lot of people are on board with the Jets again this upcoming year, that they should be able to have a bounce back season as long as Aaron Rodgers is healthy, which and productive, which is definitely in the realm of possibility. And the Dolphins as well, where they sort of took care of business this offseason, maybe a couple losses that aren't ideal for them, specifically on that defensive side of the field, but still going to be likely in contention. So I don't know, things just aren't all so easy for the Bills, where again they're going to have a great chance, but especially a few years ago when the Josh Allen hype train was building up, everybody was in on the Bills, especially that offseason that they had signed Von Miller. I think it was headed into the 2022 season, and it's just been pretty, they've been in the playoffs. It's not like they've been disappointing. It's just, that's a little bit of a lesson of things go wrong in the NFL. And that's why, you get the young quarterback and you feel great about it. And you feel like, yeah, their window's going to be open for the next 10 plus years. But, it's not that easy. The NFL is the king of parity. So the Bills have done a good job staying afloat here. But this is at a point now where they feel like they have to sort of, begin to capitalize here on the prime years of Josh Allen's career. Physically, I am sort of curious what exactly the time frame would be for his prime, because it's not like he's an incredible athlete, and that's the thing, is it's so reliant on his athletic ability, I feel like, at this point. It's not that Josh Allen eventually can't turn into a little bit more of a connoisseur of the game from an intelligence and a mental standpoint, but it's not what he is right now. Now, I thought that he did show at times last season an ability to, especially once they sort of started looking off Stephon Diggs a little bit more, they were putting together more methodical drives and such, and they were able to have some success there. So again, we'll see. I feel like we're getting a little bit off topic here. The Bills are going to be in the realm of contention for pretty much as long as Josh Allen's going to be there. But they keep having these tough breaks, and especially from an injury standpoint, which is just professional sports. But again, I really can't understate the importance, I think, that Matt Milano has with this Bills roster. So let me know in the comments section what your thoughts are on this entire situation, and whether or not you think I'm being a little bit dramatic about how key this loss was. But we are now going to be moving on to the Washington Commanders, where there were some reports coming out this morning about the Commanders searching for a more sustainable wide receiver 2 option, which caught me a little bit by surprise. We're going to be diving into how things broke this way for the Commanders, and whether or not there is a certain wide receiver from San Francisco that the Commanders have been attached to for a couple months now. So we will talk about whether or not anything could pull through there as well. But stick with us, and we will be right back with that after this quick break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube. Absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast as we continue on here with some storylines from NFL training camp. As earlier today, we got some reports about how the Washington Commanders are searching for a wide receiver too. These are words that Dan Quinn actively said. There was a tweet and a report that came out earlier from Nikki Jobvala. Apologies if I mispronounced there, of the Washington Post, though, that is covering the Commanders, and they tweeted out the statement earlier this morning that Dan Quinn himself said that they are, quote, in the middle of a search for a more standout wide receiver too, which definitely was a surprise to me because it feels like, at least, you know, from public perception wise, that they've kind of had their two that they would be able to build around. And of course, Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson has flashed a lot of promise since entering the NFL. But apparently, he has really been struggling with drops during training camp, and ultimately, you know, just over 1,000 yards in 2 seasons worth of sample size really isn't that productive. Now, there's been inconsistency at the quarterback position in the past as well, which definitely plays into this, but supposedly, if he's not looking sharp at training camp, this is a bit of a big deal for them because the Commanders seemed like, again, they were building up a bit of that dual threat wide receiver with McLaurin and then drafting Dotson in the first round of 2022. And again, the flashes definitely stood out, able to catch 7 touchdowns his rookie season, but this past year just was not giving them the level of production they were anticipating despite being healthier in 2023. Now again, take it upon yourself to sort of decide whether you want to put that more so on the quarterback play last season versus, I mean, it's not like 2022 they necessarily had all that consistent quarterback play either. So, you know, I guess it's a little bit of a double-edged sword there, but the Commanders have definitely invested into some weapons trying to put around Jayden Daniels, the, of course, rookie quarterback that they drafted with the 2nd overall pick this year, and they want to make sure that he is surrounded with sufficient talent, because if there's one thing in the NFL that's a real consistent is the idea that you sort of have to, especially in those years of the rookie contract, you have to put enough talent around to make up for the fact that you are getting play from the most important position at a very cheap price. And now for the Commanders, hasn't necessarily, and again, this is Jayden Daniels' rookie season, so by no means am I saying that they've already screwed this up, because that's just far from the case. But it is very interesting to sort of look at how all of this plays out, considering the fact that Terry McLaurin only has one more fully guaranteed season on the books. It's this upcoming year, and then there is a potential out for 2025. McLaurin's going to be 30 years old at that point. Again, I feel like the Commanders probably willing to keep him around, but at that point, McLaurin is probably going to be trying to look to cash out one more time on a contract extension. So they're going to have a decision to make there. Again, who knows how this sort of all plays out with Jahan Dotson in that same quote that I was referencing earlier as well, in terms of the search for a wide receiver too. Olamide Zaccheaus was somebody that Dan Quinn noted in that same media session as somebody who has stood out so far during training camp. So Definitely not what I expected there. I definitely wouldn't be putting too much stock necessarily in him becoming the wide receiver 2 for them. But I don't know, just adding to the context of what Dan Quinn said there. Wanted to at least note that. But it's interesting because the Commanders obviously have been very much attached to the name of Brandon Ayuk throughout the course of the offseason, as Ayuk has hinted at wanting to reunite with his former college quarterback in Jayden Daniels, and the Commanders seem to be interested in trying to pursue a deal for Brandon Ayuk, but the issue came when the asking price from San Francisco was reportedly too high for what the Commanders were willing to pay, and ultimately they cut off communication in terms of an Ayuk deal. So that whole situation with Ayuk is honestly just so messy, and I kind of don't even want to talk about it all that much until we actually get some real action on it. But I thought it was interesting to at least bring it back up in this whole conversation because, again, the long-term stability of the Commanders receivers, they're looking for a number 2 right now. Wide receiver 1 for them, there's a chance that he's not here, or that even if he's here, that he's searching a long-term deal and his current contract is coming to an end. So it is it's definitely going to be a position of need for them, especially as Daniels is going to be their week 1 starter. They don't have really any other options. I don't know if he's officially been named that from the team, but behind him is Marcus Mariota and Jeff Driscoll. Just doesn't really seem like they have any plans other than to play Daniels, and I think that that's ultimately the right decision for them. They probably have a below average offensive line, but have at least enough offensive weapons that they can be a competent offense. Also, I do think that Jayden Daniels, with his athleticism, is a little bit of a self-starter in terms of an offense that even if the pass protection isn't quite as elite as, maybe you would prefer to help groom your quarterback and get him the experience, I think he's going to be more than capable of handling his own. He's at this point 24 years old, I believe. I think that he should be just fine in terms of he's 23 years old, turning 24 in December. But I wouldn't worry about him not being able to understand how to navigate the pressure and everything. But it's just a fact of the matter that eventually the Commanders are probably going to look to buy in a little bit more while Daniels is on this rookie contract. It's not like the Commanders didn't necessarily invest this offseason as well. Having the 2nd overall pick, knowing that Sam Howell was not going to be their starter, that's why they were leaning on Jacoby Brissett a little bit more at the end of last season. But I think that, we saw them go out and sign a Tyler Biadasz in free agency. They made a number of different upgrades on the defensive side of the ball as well. They added Austin Eckler in free agency. So I wouldn't say that, it's a team that spends a decent amount of money at this point. And Zach Ertz, another acquisition for them over the course of the offseason. So, they are starting to put the building blocks together, but still, it's like you don't look at any position group, I would say, at this point, and say they are truly elite. I mean, D-tackle would probably be the one position for them between Daron Payne and Jonathan Allen. That is a very nice duo. But outside of that, I do sort of think that it's a lot of mediocrity outside of that. And it's going to, take a number of different moves in order to build that back up. Again, Daniels, I think he should be capable of at least being a passable quarterback option for a few years here. I don't know if I necessarily see the superstar potential with him, but I definitely think that he can be a starting quarterback in the NFL. And I guess it's just interesting who his partner in crime is going to be 4 years to come here, because again, you look at Zach Ertz and Austin Eckler. Those are not long-term solutions. Those are just sort of pro-ready. Let's buy you while you're cheap, give you a couple years, and eventually you'll be on your way, and hopefully we have our replacements ready by the time that they're gone. And Brian Robinson is a very promising young running back. I liked the addition of Ben Sinnott in the draft this year. Took him in the third round, I believe it was, second round. They took him out of Kansas State. Very versatile, able to get in the trenches a little bit, along with being a decent passing threat as well. So I definitely see, the vision of the way they are moving here, but I wasn't really anticipating this level of concern at the wide receiver position. And I guess, truthfully, I just see the touchdowns for Dotson. I mean, what is it, 12 in the past 2 years is pretty solid. 11 in the past 2 seasons. Like, that's solid production. Obviously, you'd like more, but in terms of being a wide receiver too, kind of not a bad mark there. But the drops are definitely a concern for him, and if that's going to be the case, maybe they do end up having to go another direction. But I do think that, again, wide receiver 2 is a hole that's pretty easy to fill. It's just a matter as well. I'm definitely long-term storyline here. Curious about how they choose to go about Terry McLaurin and that contract situation, but let me know in the comment section what your thoughts are. But we are now going to be previewing the upcoming season for the Green Bay Packers after they signed Jordan Love to their new deal. They emerged last season and seemed like they could be closer than we ever anticipated. So is that success sustainable long term, or was it a flash in the pan? We will be diving into that. But first, a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We'll be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we are now going to be continuing our previews for each of the 32 NFL teams. This week we are doing the NFC North, and today we have the Green Bay Packers, who last year, especially in the second half of the season, were able to go on a little bit of a run to surprise a lot of people, not just make the playoffs. That alone would have been a win, the youngest playoff team in the league at the time. But not just that, they were also able to ultimately pull off the first ever playoff upset as a 7 seed since the NFL expanded the playoff pool. So made a little bit of history along the way there, and were in large part able to do so because of the play of quarterback Jordan Love, who Love obviously was drafted to back up to overtake Rodgers someday. He didn't take that kindly, rattled off a couple MVPs almost out of spite for the Packers front office group, but ultimately kind of seems to, at least at this point, have worked out very well for Green Bay, where Rodgers, they end up parting ways with him as he heads into his age 40 season, and Jordan Love, with a few years on the bench, learning at least to some degree under Aaron Rodgers in the system with Matt LaFleur, was really incredible for his first season. Now, ultimately, when you look at Jordan Love's season, I mean, it took a lot of time to develop, because early on it was not pretty with the Packers. They had lost the first, I think it was, they lost something along the lines of 5 of their first 7 games, I think it was, and things were definitely not looking up for the Packers. A lot of questions, obviously, at that point. But really, after that loss to I'd say it was probably the loss to the Steelers specifically in Week 10, that from there they were able to rattle off 6 wins in their last 8 games, finish with a 9-8 season, and Jordan Love was really impressive down the stretch. His first moment was really in Week 3 against the Saints, where he was able to put together the two possession comeback at the end of the game there. But ultimately, again, think that the overall production from Jordan Love in year 1 was very encouraging. 4,100 yards, 32 touchdowns, 11 interceptions. You'd probably like to see decrease a little bit, but again, this was his first full season, and that is kind of, just about as good as you can possibly ask for Jordan Love. So they get him on a brand new deal, again, 4 years, $220 million. It's a pretty small sample size for the extent of how much money the Packers just paid Jordan Love, but ultimately I do think that it was the right decision for them, and they've had more than enough time to internally scout Jordan Love. They clearly like what they see, because sure, it's the 1 year of actual experience out on the field, but they've also been working with him for an additional 3 years on top of that behind the scenes, that if they feel like he's good to go and that this isn't just a flash in the pan of success, I sort of believe the guys in the room there. Obviously, they're a little bit biased maybe to some degree because he's very important to their future, but I don't think that, delusion necessarily makes you give out a $220 million contract. So I thought it was the right move for them. I thought that they have their quarterback of the future. And recently, Matt LaFleur has been asked about who their wide receiver of the future is. And more specifically, this idea of having a true number 1 wide receiver. And he had a very funny response to that on Monday. He said, quote, "I want to vomit every time I hear number 1 receiver." I think we've got a bunch of them, especially those, I would say, top 4 guys that are capable of being a number 1 in some capacity. The 4 specifically that he is referencing are Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, Jaden Reed, and Dontavian Wicks. All of them had their moments of flash throughout the course of last season, and I'd even show some love to their tight end group as well, with Luke Musgrave and Tucker Kraft, that they were also able to, actually produce for them. And this is a very young core. 6 out of their top 7 pass catchers last season have been drafted since 2022. The only one not in that core is Aaron Jones, who they obviously just let go this offseason, and they upgraded him with Josh Jacobs as well. I do think that that's an upgrade. It's maybe marginal, but I think that Josh Jacobs is a slightly better player than Aaron Jones is, and I think that ultimately, even if coming off of a down year Jacobs had statistically, I think that he's still got a lot to give for the Packers. He can be a little bit more of a threat than Aaron Jones in the pass game, and I really like that pickup for them. So I think that, they're going to have a solid run game. Their pass game, again, no, maybe not a traditional number 1 wide receiver, but a lot of guys that can produce. And Jordan Love, his ability to spread the ball around the field was really incredible to me in the 2023 season. So I don't think it's something that they're necessarily going to let themselves get hung up on, and they have a lot of potential talent on that roster. Maybe it'll be an issue a couple years from now when they decide which ones they want to hold on to, which ones they're going to be comfortable with leaving. But again, it's a very talented core overall. Quickly here on their offensive line as well, they do lose John Runyon Jr. in free agency, which is a loss for them. He ended up signing with the Giants, but they used their first-round pick on an offensive lineman in Jordan Morgan, who was more of a tackle at Arizona, converted to guard. He's projected to be their starter at right guard in his position, so ultimately, able to at least replenish the group with maybe a little bit more youth and figure out how things work from there. Maybe he does end up bumping over to the tackle position at some point during his tenure with the Packers. Defensively, I think that overall this is a pretty good group. Now, they have had some losses over the course of the past couple of years, definitely a lot of changing pieces, but overall still, they have had a pretty good success of being able to find players that can produce for them. And this year they made the splash move to try and they signed Xavier McKinney in free agency in what should be an upgrade for that defense off of what they had before, where it was Darnell Savage. They ended up losing him in free agency, but McKinney's definitely a better player. And overall, looking at this Packers defense, I'm definitely a fan of Jair Alexander. I don't know if he, especially with the injuries, has been part of the big thing, but I don't know if he's fully gotten the recognition he deserves. It's one of those things where it almost sounds like Alexander is sort of thrown into, he doesn't get enough respect, and that's a little bit overplayed at times. But Jair Alexander, when fully healthy, definitely has a case for a top 3 cornerback in the NFL. You add McKinney into the mix as well. I think that their front 7 is pretty talented. Kenny Clark, Preston Smith, Rashawn Gary, the way that they've been able to develop over the course of these past few years. Devontae Wyatt as well, former first-round pick in 2028. He's been able to show a little bit of production off of, maybe more limited reps. But this is, another pretty young defense, but a lot of good players. And I think that, the identity of this Packers team is going to be wrapped up in their offense inherently because of Matt LaFleur, but their defense can definitely get the job done. Looking at their schedule, there are a couple games that really intrigue me. Week 7 against the Houston Texans and Week 11 at Chicago against the Bears. So Week 7 specifically, I'm looking at this matchup between CJ Stroud and Jordan Love. Feels like they're getting compared to one another a lot. Obviously, Stroud, just his rookie season last year. Love, been in the NFL for another 3 years prior to that. But it was also his first full year starting, and production-wise, they were very similar in terms of that, especially when you look at the playoff stats for the two of them. So that's one. I don't know if any two quarterbacks have gotten more love over the course of the offseason than Jordan Love and CJ Stroud. So I'm looking at that game. And then Week 11 at Chicago is an interesting one to me, because I talked earlier this week about how I do have some optimism for the Bears this season, and now that we have the new quarterbacks in town for each of them, this would be a little bit of a statement if the Bears were ever to, be able to beat the Packers this year, having Caleb Williams sort of take back some of that pride, and, the Bears actually having some hope for long term that they don't have to be little brothers to the Packers anymore. I think that this is going to be a very big game. But overall, pretty middle of the pack strength of schedule for the Packers, and they're going to be in contention yet again for a playoff spot. I think they will be a playoff team once again. I think they're going to have maybe some hiccups along the way. Again, you're talking about Jordan Love, who is experienced and inexperienced at the same time. So I actually feel better about their playoff prospects more than their, regular season prospects to some degree. I think that they could have some slippages in the regular season that are part of the growing pains, but I definitely trust them in the playoffs. So with that being said, I have them with 10 wins this season. Their over-under line is 10.5 according to Sharp Football Analysis. I'm going slightly under that. Again, I believe in the team. I think that they're going to be in the playoffs and that they are going to be a wild card team that nobody wants to play. But I do have the Lions winning this division, and the Packers I would love to see a Lions-Packers playoff matchup. That would be so much fun. But let me know what your expectations are for the Packers this season. But we are now going to be taking our final break of the show, and when we come back on the other side, we will be diving into some of the takeaways from the baseball series between the Boston Red Sox and the Texas Rangers. So we will be diving into that. First, a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back. Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast for our final segment of the day, where we are going to be diving into the key takeaways from the series between the Boston Red Sox and Texas Rangers. And this was a series for the Red Sox coming off of, a pretty emotionally charged couple of days where it seemed like this was going to be the perfect time for the Red Sox to be able to bounce back, considering they were swept by the Astros over the weekend. Then on that weekend series, there's the whole Jarren Duran debacle where he says a homophobic slur to a member of the crowd. He ends up getting suspended for a couple games, and vibes were very low coming into this series against the Rangers, but they seem to be swinging in the other direction, where the Red Sox were able to walk it off in Game 1, thanks to Rob Refsnyder in extra innings. And then in Game 2, having, what was a pretty high leverage situation coming into the 8th inning. We actually saw Kenley Jansen come in for that last out of the 8th inning. And by the time he came back out, the Red Sox the bottom of the lineup especially came through to sort of bury the Rangers in that matchup on Tuesday, to the point where things are starting to roll. And then just an absolute choke job on Wednesday by the Red Sox, where they had a 3-run lead in the top of the 9th inning with 2 outs, and Wyatt Langford takes Josh Winkowski deep to tie the game. And then immediately in the 10th inning, Zach Kelly allows a 2-run homer that ends up being the dagger, and the Red Sox lose this game. It was a bit of a disaster, as especially the bullpen with this Red Sox team has just been atrocious as of late, and we'll sort of get into the specifics there. But Now, even before diving into that whole thing, you look further into this collapse by the Sox in the ninth inning, and the game should have been over if the Red Sox could just turn double plays. But obviously, this defense has been extremely challenged in the past few years. They had an opportunity with one out to turn two, and instead a throw that's off the mark from Cedon Rafaela going to Romy at first base. Interesting to note as well that Nick Sogard, who was playing second, he had just gotten hurt the play prior, so that's what has to bring Rafaela in for shortstop, where Rafaela is going to be an all-league defender at some point in his career. He's already shown so much potential, but especially at shortstop, which isn't his natural position, he's definitely shown a tendency to be a little bit less consistency at shortstop. And, you know, I also think that Romy Gonzalez, he might have unnecessarily leapt off of the bag in that point as well. Just can't really do that. It was just messy, and then obviously Winkowski is the one who lets up the bomb. So as much as, yeah, sure, that could have been an extra out as well. This is just a Red Sox bullpen that it feels like outside of Kenley Jansen, they are just so desperate for arms that can come in and give them, you know, one quality inning. And that has felt like a lot to ask lately, even though it really shouldn't be all that much. And it hurts more when you look even further into the game and the opportunities the Red Sox let slip away, notably Jarren Duran in his first game back from suspension. He had a pretty rough game overall, but specifically him getting caught stoling in the 8th inning before the Sox put together a rally and ended up scoring 3 runs. That should have been 4. That Wyatt Langford at bat shouldn't have been the game tying run. And, you know, just the mental mistakes are definitely hurting the Red Sox lately. This is a young team, obviously, and, you know, that's to be expected to some degree, but it's also the Boston Red Sox. So you do feel like there should be, you know, a level of maturity, and they haven't been able to necessarily live up to that as of late. So, you know, this Game 3 loss, I'm going to try not to spend the entire segment talking about it, because ultimately the Red Sox win this series. So it's just such a sour taste in your mouth as to how things could have looked coming out of this series. And to be fair, it's against the Rangers, who are, you know, not mathematically out of the playoff race, but are probably, in all intents and purposes, out of the playoff race. And you're sort of scratching and clawing to end up beating them. So those were some tough wins in games 1 and 2, and it felt like you're able to get through that, and you can start to really build some momentum back. Again, things were low after that sweep from the Astros series and all the extracurricular stuff that was going on off the field with Duran's suspension. But I think that, you know, having that game end the way that it did, and having the worst loss of the season probably for the Red Sox, and headed into now a 4-game series against the Orioles, it's such a whiplash almost of emotions, where it was as much of a win as it possibly could have been headed into the 9th inning, and the Red Sox found a way to lose that, and now they have a team that they haven't really been able to beat in 3 years. That's who you're matching up against in sort of a must-have series. It's just a brutal turn of events. So, you know, ultimately, again, Red Sox take the series, and what I do want to give them credit for is their offense continues to really produce. And that's something that, especially leading into the deadline, was a big topic of conversation, especially the idea that, okay, well, if they just face a left-handed starter, they're kind of screwed, because all of their significant hitters are lefty for the most part, and, you know, it just leads to a very clear matchup issue. But even despite that, the Red Sox, we went over the stats headed into this series, not sure where they're standing, or it was headed into the weekend specifically, but number 1 pretty much since the All-Star break, number 1 in batting average, OPS, runs scored, and everything. Again, obviously the numbers are probably off now, but, you even still in this series, they give you 5 runs, 9 runs, and 7 runs. So they are playing very well right now. So if there is a positive, it's talking about the continued production from Masataka Yoshida for somebody who was looking like he could maybe be one of the worst contracts in baseball earlier this year when he was struggling with his injuries and he wasn't hitting at all. He's no longer in the outfield because he's not good defensively. So that was definitely a concern at one point. He's been unbelievable as of late. But and like I mentioned, you got a little bit of production as well from some of the role players in this series. Romy Gonzalez starting to swing the bat a little bit better. Nick Sogard has been sort of a random addition to this lineup and giving you basically as good of second base play as the Red Sox have gotten since Dustin Pedroia retired, because it's more of a statement on how bad that second base position has been for them as of late. But I think that's a very fair statement. And even the starting pitching in this series was able to give you some really nice outings. Just going down the line here with each of the starts, you look at that game 1, and ultimately in that game you have Brian Bayo on the mound, broke a streak of, I think it was 4 or 5 straight starts where he had allowed a home run. And he ultimately in this game gave you 6 innings pitched, 4 hits, 3 walks, not great, but just 1 earned run, struck out 5, and again kept the ball in the ballpark. So pretty solid stuff there from him. Game 2, definitely a little bit annoying considering how things played out with Cutter Crawford, because he was absolutely dealing through those first 5 innings, and ultimately, things fall apart in the 6th. You can only get 1 out. They end up bringing in Cam Boozer, who had, him and Chafin is the player for the Texans as well. Andrew Chafin, I think his name is. Both 2 of the worst, pitching appearances I think that I've ever really seen from either one of them. But Boozer was horrendous in this game, ends up walking a couple guys to score some runs, and Cutter ultimately 4 earned runs, 3 hits, 1 walk. It felt like it was a start that had so much promise, but fortunately Cutter, with the fatigue that he's dealing with, he only makes it 67 pitches in this game, so would have liked more there. And then Houck, another one where, it definitely didn't feel great for a lot of that game. Traffic in the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, and then some in the 7th as well. But I definitely didn't think he was going to reach the 7th based off of how things were starting. Just unable to find the strike zone early on there, but worked himself back into the groove. Yeah, you get a good number of base runners, 6 hits, 2 walks, but only 2 earned runs. Ultimately a pretty good performance there as well. But the bullpen has just been a disaster for them. And it's a part of their game where I thought that coming out of the trade deadline, that they were going to be, I think I said on this show, and if I did, then, I'm outing myself and was a horrendous take, but I thought they could have been one of the better bullpens in the MLB, considering the fact that Kenley Jansen, I think even though he is a heart attack in the waiting in terms of he always a base runner with Kenley, but first off, that 4-out save that he had on Tuesday, he absolutely crushed it there. I think it was 13 pitches, so he was unbelievable there. And then, to be fair, we still haven't gotten to see much of Justin Slayton and Chris Martin yet. That's really the big X factor that I was leaning on as well. Chris Martin, he pitched last night. They gave him 1 out. Why not use him into the 9th inning? He is your second most reliable bullpen arm, I think, at this point. And I do like Lucas Sims. Obviously, he had a little bit of a meltdown in the Astros series. But, that's the thing, is you're just talking about so few players that you can really trust. And you can't just lean on Kenley Jansen every single night that you need a win. And, I was texting with a friend of mine last night during the game. Well, he was saying, where's Kenley when it comes to the 10th inning? It's like, he just pitched 4 outs the night before. I understand maybe a little bit of soft Kenley's not a young guy. He's in his late 30s, and you should have somebody that you can put in the 9th inning in a 3-run game and be able to not blow that game. But unfortunately, that's not really the case for the Red Sox right now. And ultimately, they're sitting here still very much alive in competition for that last wild card spot. Going to be a big stretch of games coming up now. They're going to be going on to face the Orioles, and then they have the Astros and the Diamondbacks in consecutive series. So going to be a tough stretch there, but after that, the workload softens up a little bit. You get the Blue Jays, the Tigers, and the White Sox are down the road there as well. So, you're going to have to survive this next, I think it's a 10-game stretch, 4 games versus Baltimore, and then 3 versus Arizona, and the 3 versus Houston. But I mean, they're still very much alive in terms of the wild card hopes. But I mean, if things are going to change again, Slayton, Chris Martin, they got to come back and they got to be actual reliable players for them, because at this point, again, the bullpen, Luis Garcia has been horrendous since the Red Sox traded for him. I think his ERA is above 12 since he's been with the Red Sox. He's given them nothing to build off of, and the bullpen as a whole just is pretty messed up. They also got the news earlier this week as well that James Paxton, sort of leading on to earlier the conversation of the Red Sox felt so dead after that weekend Astros series, that James Paxton has a torn calf. So good chance he doesn't, a partially torn calf. So good chance that he doesn't return for them this season, and their arms are going to be worked. And for a group that is, I'd say, especially the starting group, pretty inexperienced in terms of going this deep into the season, Sox are going to have their trials ahead of them, but still in play. So we will definitely see. But that is all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for tuning into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. Remember to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. Be sure to check us out on social media as well for more exclusive short content. And we will see you tomorrow, same time as always at 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern. Take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't